Dozens of trials and executions took place just over 400 years ago across Scotland, and the reason for this disarray and brutality was witches. They were accused of murdering, ruining crops, causing storms and shipwrecks, and working together to cause evil because witches worked for Satan. Hundreds were persecuted, tortured, executed in a hysterical effort to dispel and remove witchcraft forever. But how could such a deadly and violent idea get so out of control? And what drove persecutors to such awful lengths? This is the story of how satanic witchcraft caused terror and mass hysteria into Scotland. I will now turn to expert Elwood, who has specialised in the North Berwick witch trials.
So the area of the witch trials I know the most about is the North Berwick witch trials, specifically in the 1600s. These were some of the direct impacts of James VI and First, as he's known, of Scotland and England. He is the one who really pushed for a lot of the witch trials in Scotland and England. Rumour has it that he was sailing to go and meet his wife in Denmark, and his boat got hit by so many bad storms that he had to turn around and come back to England, and he was convinced that this was the work of witches, and really kick-started his interest in witch hunting. The North Berwick witch trials are especially interesting because they are some of the only witch trials where the monarch himself directly turned up. Usually they were handled by other people. James would kind of oversee things from like the royal seat, but didn't get involved. But he actually came to North Berwick himself and witnessed a few of the trials. He even got a few of the confessions himself. There is a famous case of a woman named Agnes, supposedly was brought before James on the trial of witchcraft, and as legend has it, whispered in his ear rumours about his wedding, information that she couldn't possibly have had otherwise, and this convinced James that she was a witch. Unclear how much of that actually happened, how much of that is rumour and folktale. Royal weddings weren't exactly private affairs even then, so she might have just known this from the news, but as far as James was concerned, she was a witch. Agnes as well was notable, the way that she was tortured and confessed. She was stripped naked, shaved her head, and they pinned her to the wall of a cell with a skull's bridle in her mouth. So a skull's bridle was a kind of metallic contraption that would silence a woman, and it had hooks in there so you couldn't speak, and she was pinned to the wall of the cell with this in her mouth for days on end. It's one of the most well recorded ways in which women were tortured in this period, and one of the most horrific, I would say. The torture methods included people having their nails ripped off and then having hot bits of metal shoved in where the nails used to be. There was also a case of one of the men who was arrested because it was also men. It's not really clear what the gender breakdown was. Again, the records aren't great, but basically had his feet crushed until they couldn't be used, and that's how they got the information from him. Brutal torture is a really recurring theme, unfortunately, in the witch trials, both in North Berwick and sort of in general. People often say, why would these people confess? Maybe they were doing something, or was it, just mass hysteria? The answer to why did people confess to being witches is generally torture. People will admit to anything after no sleep, a lot of pain, no food. They would admit to basically whatever they were being asked, because hopefully that would make it end. Not everybody who was accused in the North Berwick witch trials was killed at the stake. That is the sort of most prominent image we have. Most of the bodies were burned because it was believed that you should burn a witch's body. but a lot of the cases they either died under interrogation or they would be hanged and then their bodies would be burned. Again, we don't really have records of how many people attended these burnings or like what the process was, just that they happened. There were also a few people who were supposedly bewitched, who led to people getting arrested. Mass hysteria in a time like that, it's this big religious fever, people will very easily get swept up and possibly aren't even lying exactly, like they will convince themselves that they have been bewitched, and that can be taken as evidence because how could you prove otherwise? And if you're looking for the devil and witches in every corner in the way that James was, you are inevitably going to find them.
The next story takes us further up Scotland, right in the heart of Edinburgh. In Edinburgh, you can't go more than about 6 feet without hearing about some sort of story, witches being one of them. I will now turn to Joshua, who is a historian and has previously done ghost tours throughout Edinburgh.
In the late 17th century, Edinburgh looked very different to how it looks now. And at the top of the West Bow, the Bowhead, they called it, there were a group of particularly, I dislike the term, but popularly considered to be holy men, the Bowhead Saints, and one of them was a man called Thomas Weir. By all accounts, tall, striking man, dark figure, and he always dressed in black, and he carried a blackthorn staff, and he went everywhere with the staff, and it was carved blackthorn staff. It's supposed to have ended being topped with the figure of a face, and once he passed his 70th birthday, he was changed. And one day in the middle of his preaching, he began to spout awful things. He was allegedly in an incestuous relationship with his sister, with whom he lived. Her name was Jean Weir, although she was commonly called Grizzle. And the two of them had made a pact with the devil. He also confessed to committing acts with animals. He was absolutely insistent that this was true and that he had done all of this. And so the two of them, Thomas Weir and Grizzle, were taken into the toll booth, kept separate, and they were interrogated. And Major Weir was done for adultery, incest, and bestiality. They were very reluctant to prosecute him for witchcraft, for some reason. Not entirely sure. And so he was strangled, and he was burned. Same pyre, his staff was thrown in as well. And it was reputed to have danced and writhed with a life of its own. Grizzle, on the other hand, she was also tried. She was hanged in the Grassmarket before crowds, of course, as public executions were back in those days, and determined to make one last spectacle of herself. Before she was hanged, she attempted to strip herself naked, so she got dropped fairly sharpish after she tried that one.
Now, the present day. Witch trials are not a thing of the past. They still occur today in numerous countries such as Saudi Arabia, Tanzania, Nigeria, Romania, and many more. Particularly in Romania, the government introduced a new law taxing witches, fortune tellers, and astrologers in 2011. I will now turn to Francesca, who has more knowledge on this topic.
Between 2010 and 2021, in India, over 1,500 people were killed for witchcraft. Now, witchcraft has been in the Bible, and it's still going on today. So it's still happening. It was Henry VIII that first ruled that witchcraft was punishable by death. Elizabeth I carried it on, and then James I basically went on an absolute witch hunt, writing the book of demonology. It influenced the law system as well, so even children could stand on trial against their own family, like Janet Device, who stood on trial 9 years old and told the court that a mother, a brother, a sister, and 7 other people, were all witches. So it was really, really bad times.